The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows across the ornate sitting room. Kate Middleton sat at the edge of an antique chair, her hands trembling as she held the official letter that would change everything. The words blurred before her eyes as tears threatened to spill over. William stood by the tall window, his shoulders tense, watching the world outside continue as if nothing had happened. The letter contained news that no couple should ever have to face. The palace doctors had delivered their verdict after months of tests and consultations. Kate's health issues, which had been carefully hidden from the public eye, were more serious than anyone had imagined. The constant fatigue, the dizzy spells during public engagements, and the moments when she felt like she might collapse had all been dismissed as stress from royal duties. Now they knew the truth. William turned away from the window, his face pale but determined. He had always been the strong one, the one who carried the weight of royal expectations without complaint. But seeing Kate like this, vulnerable and scared, made his own fears surface. He remembered his mother's struggles, how Diana had faced her battles alone while the world watched. He had sworn he would never let Kate endure the same isolation. The palace staff moved quietly through the corridors, unaware of the crisis unfolding in the private quarters. Kate had become a master at putting on her public face, smiling and waving even when her body felt like it was betraying her. The charity events, the ribbon cuttings, the endless royal engagements had taken their toll. She had pushed herself, too hard, trying to prove she belonged in this world that had once seemed so foreign to a girl from Berkshire. William knelt beside her chair, taking her shaking hands in his. His voice was barely a whisper as he spoke words of comfort, but inside his own heart was breaking. They had built their life around duty and service, but now they faced the possibility that everything might change. The doctors had been clear about the need for immediate treatment and rest, but how could they explain a sudden withdrawal from public life without revealing the truth? Kate looked into William's eyes and saw her own fear reflected there. They had always been a team, supporting each other through the pressures of royal life. When the media had been cruel, when the expectations had seemed impossible, they had faced it together. But this felt different, more personal, more frightening. This wasn't about public opinion or royal protocol. This was about her life, their future, and the family they were trying to build. The palace had become both a sanctuary and a prison. Behind its walls they could be themselves, but those same walls also meant that every decision they made would be scrutinized by advisors, courtiers, and ultimately the Queen herself. Kate had learned to navigate the complex hierarchy of royal life, but now she wondered if she had the strength to fight this battle while also fighting for her health. William's phone buzzed constantly with messages from his private secretary, reminders of upcoming engagements and royal duties. Each notification felt like another weight on their shoulders. How could they attend a state dinner when Kate could barely make it through breakfast without feeling exhausted? How could they smile for the cameras when their world was falling apart behind closed doors? In the quiet moments between official duties, Kate found herself thinking about the life she might have had. She thought about her sister Pippa, who could make choices without considering how they would affect the monarchy. She thought about her parents, who had worked hard to give their daughters normal childhoods, never imagining that one day Kate would be living in a palace, bound by centuries of tradition and expectation. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They had everything that money could buy: beautiful homes, designer clothes, access to the best medical care in the world. Yet they felt more trapped than ever. The golden cage of royalty had never felt more confining than it did in those dark moments when Kate's health seemed uncertain and their future hung in the balance. William remembered the early days of their relationship, when they were just university, students trying to figure out their lives. Kate had been so full of energy then, laughing easily and bringing light into rooms wherever she went. Now, he watched her struggle to maintain that same brightness, even in private. The woman he had fallen in love with was still there, but she was fighting a battle that no one outside these walls could understand. As evening approached, they sat together in silence, holding each other close. The weight of unspoken fears filled the space between them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more decisions to make about Kate's treatment and their public appearances. They would have to find a way to balance her health needs with their royal obligations, all while keeping their private struggles hidden from a world that watched their every move. Kate closed her eyes and leaned against William's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Despite everything they were facing, she knew they would face it together. The trembling in her hands had subsided, but the tears still came quietly in the darkness of their private chambers. Outside, London continued its endless rhythm, unaware that behind the palace doors a young couple was fighting the most important battle of their lives. The night stretched ahead of them, filled with uncertainty, but also with the quiet strength that came from knowing they weren't alone in their struggle. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would meet it as they always had, together, with courage they didn't always feel but somehow always found when they needed it most. The early morning meeting in the palace's private study felt more like a war council than a family discussion. William sat across from his father, King Charles, while Kate remained in their private quarters, too exhausted to join them. The conversation that followed would determine how they would handle the crisis that threatened to shake the very foundations of their public image. Charles listened carefully as William explained Kate's condition, his weathered hands folded on the mahogany desk that had witnessed countless royal decisions over the decades. The king's face showed no emotion, but William knew his father well enough to see the concern in his eyes. This wasn't just about Kate's health. It was about the stability of the monarchy itself during a time when public support was more fragile than ever. The palace's senior staff had already been briefed on the situation. Lord Chamberlain, the Queen's private secretary, and the head of communications sat around the polished table, their faces grave as they discussed options. Each suggestion felt like another compromise, another way of hiding the truth from people who deserved honesty from their future queen. William found himself caught between two worlds. As a husband, his only concern was Kate's well-being and recovery. As a future king, he understood the complex web of responsibilities that came with their positions. The monarchy had survived scandals and crises before, but this felt different. This was about the woman he loved, the mother of his children, and the person who had brought stability to his life when everything else felt uncertain. Back in their private quarters, Kate lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The medication made her feel disconnected from her own body, as if she were watching her life happen to someone else. She could hear muffled voices from the study below, knowing that decisions about her life were being made without her input. It reminded her of those early days in the palace when she had felt like an outsider, desperately trying to learn the unspoken rules of a world she had never been prepared for. The phone calls started early that morning. Palace Communications had crafted a careful statement about Kate needing to reduce her public engagements for health reasons. The words were chosen carefully to reveal nothing while saying everything. But Kate knew that speculation would begin, immediately. The media had always been fascinated by her health, analyzing every photo for signs of weight loss or fatigue. William returned to find Kate sitting by the window, watching the ground staff tend to the palace gardens. She looked so small in the oversized chair, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm spring weather. He had brought her tea, but it sat cooling on the side table, untouched. The simple act of drinking had become difficult on days when the medication made everything taste like metal. They talked quietly about the decisions that had been made. Kate would step back from public duties for at least 3 months, possibly longer depending on how she responded to treatment. William would continue with essential engagements but would cancel anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. It meant disappointing charities, postponing important initiatives, and letting down people who had been counting on their support. The hardest part was explaining the situation to their children. How do you tell young kids that their mother is sick without scaring them? How do you maintain normal family life when nothing feels normal anymore? Kate had always been the steady presence in their home, the one who read bedtime stories and helped with homework. Now, even those simple activities felt overwhelming. William watched Kate during their children's evening routine, seeing how she pushed herself to be present despite her exhaustion. She listened to their stories about school, helped with reading practice, and tucked them into bed with the same loving care she had always shown. But he could see the effort it took, the way she gripped the doorframe for support when she thought no one was looking. The palace physicians visited daily, adjusting medications and monitoring Kate's progress. They spoke in medical terms that made everything sound clinical and manageable, but the reality was messier and more frightening. Some days were better than others, but the good days were becoming less frequent. The uncertainty was perhaps the hardest part, not knowing if this was temporary or something they would have to learn to live with permanently. At night, when the palace was quiet and the staff had retired to their quarters, William and Kate found moments of peace in their private sitting room. They would talk about anything except her illness, memories from their university days, plans for renovating their country home, dreams of family holidays when she felt better. These conversations became lifelines, reminders that they were more than their public roles and current struggles. Kate began keeping a private journal during these weeks, writing down her thoughts when speaking felt too difficult. The pages filled with fears she couldn't voice aloud, hopes she was afraid to hold too tightly, and love letters to the life she wanted to reclaim. Writing became a way of holding on to herself when everything else felt like it was slipping away. Isolation was perhaps the most unexpected challenge. Kate had grown accustomed to busy days filled with meetings, events, and constant interaction with staff and the public. Now her world had shrunk to a few rooms in the palace, and the faces of family members and medical professionals. The silence that had once been a luxury now felt heavy and oppressive. William struggled with his own sense of helplessness. He was used to solving problems, to taking action when challenges arose. But this was something he couldn't fix with determination or royal privilege. All he could do was be present, hold her hand during difficult moments, and fight his own fears about what the future might hold. The media speculation grew more intense as Kate's absence from public events stretched on. Palace communications released regular updates about her need for rest, but the vague language only fueled more questions. William found himself avoiding news coverage, unable to bear reading the endless theories about Kate's condition when the truth was more complex and painful than any journalist could imagine. As the weeks passed, they began to find a new rhythm in their restricted life. Kate's good days became precious, celebrated quietly with walks in the private palace gardens or afternoon tea in their sitting room. William learned to read the subtle signs of her energy levels, knowing when to suggest rest and when to encourage gentle activity. They were learning to be grateful for small moments of normalcy in a life that had become anything but normal. The specialist's office in London's most exclusive private hospital felt sterile and cold, despite its expensive furnishings and calming artwork. Kate sat in the leather chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while William paced near the window. They had been coming here for weeks now, seeking answers that seemed to slip further away with each appointment. Dr. Harrison had been treating members of the royal family for over 2 decades. His calm demeanor and careful words had helped them through many health scares. But this situation was different. Kate's condition wasn't responding to treatment as quickly as they had hoped, and the uncertainty was taking its toll on both of them. The doctor's latest recommendation would require more aggressive treatment and an even longer withdrawal from public life. Kate listened to the medical explanations with a growing sense of detachment. Words like experimental treatment and extended recovery period floated around her, but all she could think about was the charity gala she was supposed to attend next month. Hundreds of people had bought tickets, expecting to see her there, to shake her hand and share their stories about the causes she championed. Now someone else would have to take her place, and she felt like she was letting everyone down. The drive back to Kensington Palace was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. William's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, his jaw set in the determined expression Kate had learned to recognize. It was the same look he wore during difficult official engagements, when he had to smile and make conversation while dealing with personal struggles. But this time, there were no cameras to perform for, no crowd to please, just the weight of decisions that would affect their entire family. Kate's mother, Carol, had been staying at the palace more frequently, helping with the children and providing the kind of support that only a mother could offer. But even her presence couldn't ease Kate's growing sense of isolation from the world outside the palace walls. She missed her old friends from university, the ones who knew her before she became a duchess, before every aspect of her life became subject to public scrutiny and royal protocol. The children had begun asking more questions about why their mother wasn't attending their school events anymore. Kate had always been the parent who showed up to sports days and parent-teacher conferences, the one who helped with homework and listened to their daily adventures. Now she found herself promising to attend events she wasn't sure she'd be well enough for, hating the disappointment she saw in their eyes when she had to cancel at the last minute. William took on more of the childcare responsibilities, something that came naturally to him but also highlighted the challenges Kate was facing. He could see how much it hurt her to watch him handle bedtime routines she had always managed, to see their youngest run to him with scraped knees instead of to her. The guilt she felt about not being the mother she wanted to be was almost harder to bear than the physical symptoms of her illness. The palace staff had become experts at managing Kate's condition discreetly. Her personal assistant learned to schedule meetings around her good and bad days, while her security detail adapted their routines to accommodate shorter outings and sudden changes in plans. Everyone was trying their best to maintain normalcy, but the strain was showing in subtle ways. Hushed conversations that stopped when she entered a room, concerned glances exchanged when they thought she wasn't looking. In the quiet hours of the afternoon, when the children were at school and William was attending to official duties, Kate found herself wandering through the palace's grand rooms. The paintings and artifacts that had once seemed intimidating now felt like old friends, witnesses to her struggles and silent supporters of her efforts to heal. She would sit in the music room sometimes, not playing the piano, but just listening to the silence and trying to imagine herself strong enough to perform again. The hardest moments came when she felt almost normal, when her energy returned temporarily and she convinced herself that maybe the doctors were wrong, maybe she was getting better faster than expected. These false dawns were cruel because they reminded her of who she used to be, of the life she was fighting to reclaim. William learned to recognize these moments too, and while he was grateful for any sign of improvement, he also feared the inevitable crash that followed. Letters and cards from well-wishers began arriving in larger numbers as news of Kate's extended absence became more widespread. The palace's correspondence office sorted through thousands of messages, from school children sending hand-drawn pictures to elderly supporters sharing their own stories of illness and recovery. Reading these messages became both a comfort and a burden for Kate. She was touched by the kindness but overwhelmed by the sense of responsibility she felt toward people she had never met. The media attention grew more intense as speculation about Kate's condition continued to swirl. Photographers camped outside the palace gates hoping to catch a glimpse of her during one of her rare outdoor walks. William found himself becoming increasingly protective, sometimes losing his temper. With staff members he felt weren't doing enough to shield Kate from unwanted attention. The pressure of being constantly watched while dealing with such a personal crisis was wearing on both of them. Dr. Harrison suggested they consider seeking treatment abroad, at a specialized clinic in Switzerland that had experience with cases similar to Kate's. The idea of leaving London, of being even further from their support systems and responsibilities, felt both terrifying and liberating. It would mean more time away from their children, more explanations to worried family members, and more fuel for media speculation, but it might also offer the kind of intensive treatment that could finally give them answers. Kate's relationship with her own body had become complicated during these months of illness. She had always been active, enjoying tennis and rowing, staying fit through outdoor activities and sports. Now she found herself afraid to push too hard, uncertain about what her limits were and frustrated by her body's unpredictability. Some days, a short walk in the garden left her exhausted. Other days she felt strong enough to dance with her children before bedtime. The palace's chef began working closely with Kate's medical team to design meals that might help with her treatment and recovery. Every aspect of her daily life became medicalized, from the timing of her meals to the temperature of her bedroom. While everyone was trying to help, Kate sometimes felt like she was disappearing under the weight of all this care and attention, becoming more of a patient than a person. William started working from home more often, turning one of their private sitting rooms into a makeshift office where he could handle royal duties while staying close to Kate. He learned to recognize the signs of her difficult days before she did, quietly adjusting their plans and creating space for rest when she needed it. Their marriage, already strong, was being tested in ways they never could have imagined, but it was also revealing new depths of love and commitment they hadn't known existed. The private jet's engines hummed softly as Kate gazed out at the clouds below, her reflection ghost-like in the small window. The decision to seek treatment in Switzerland had not been easy, but after months of limited progress in London, they felt they had no choice. William sat beside her, his hand covering hers, both of them lost in thoughts about what lay ahead at the exclusive clinic nestled in the Swiss Alps. Dr. Zimmerman had an international reputation for treating complex cases that had stumped other specialists. His clinic was known for its discretion as much as its medical expertise, having treated celebrities, politicians, and royalty from around the world. But reputation meant nothing if he couldn't help Kate find her way back to health and the life she desperately wanted to reclaim. The clinic looked more like a luxury resort than a medical facility, with its pristine white buildings set against a backdrop of snow-capped mountains. Kate's room had a breathtaking view of Lake Geneva, and under different circumstances, she might have felt like she was on holiday. Instead, she felt more vulnerable than ever, far from home and surrounded by strangers who spoke in careful, professional tones about her body, as if she weren't in the room. William struggled with having to leave Kate alone during the initial assessment period. Palace duties called him back to London, but every fiber of his being wanted to stay by her side. The phone calls between Switzerland and England became lifelines, with Kate trying to sound stronger than she felt, and William attempting to share news from home without revealing his own growing anxiety about managing royal responsibilities while worrying about his wife. The treatment protocol Dr. Zimmerman recommended was more intensive than anything Kate had undergone before. It involved experimental therapies that required her to stay at the clinic for at least 6 weeks, possibly longer depending on her response. The thought of being away from her children for so long made her physically sick, but the alternative, continuing to decline while trying to maintain public appearances, was no longer viable. Kate's days at the clinic fell into a strange rhythm of medical appointments, treatments, and long hours of rest. She found herself sharing meals with other patients, each fighting their own battles with illnesses that had no simple answers. There was a tech entrepreneur from Silicon Valley dealing with chronic fatigue, a famous artist struggling with autoimmune issues, and a former Olympic athlete whose career had been cut short by a mysterious condition that left her bedridden for months. These conversations with fellow patients became unexpectedly healing for Kate. For the first time in years, she was just another person seeking treatment, not a duchess whose every symptom was analyzed by experts and whose condition was discussed in hushed tones by palace staff. She could talk openly about her fears without worrying about how her words might be interpreted or reported. The anonymity was both liberating and lonely. William visited whenever his schedule allowed, usually arriving exhausted after long flights and official engagements. Kate could see the toll that managing everything alone was taking on him. His face had grown thinner, and there were dark circles under his eyes that even palace makeup artists couldn't completely hide. He tried to be strong for her during these visits, but she could sense his own fears about her condition and their future together. The children's voices on video calls were both a comfort and a source of heartache for Kate. They had started a countdown calendar, marking off days until Mummy comes home. But even they could see that the date kept getting pushed back as her treatment extended longer than originally planned. Their school drawings covered one wall of her clinic room, cheerful reminders of the life she was fighting to return to. Dr. Zimmerman's approach was different from the London specialists. He spent hours talking with Kate about her life before, the illness, her stress levels, her eating habits, and even her emotional state during various periods of her royal duties. He believed that her condition was connected to years of suppressing her own needs while trying to meet impossible expectations, and that true healing would require addressing both physical and psychological factors. The therapy sessions were harder than Kate had expected. She had always prided herself on being strong, on adapting to royal life without complaint, on supporting William and their children no matter what challenges they faced. Now she was being asked to examine whether this constant self-sacrifice had contributed to her body's breakdown. The idea that her own dedication and sense of duty might have made her sick was almost too painful to consider. Some nights, alone, in her pristine clinic room with its view of the serene lake, Kate allowed herself to cry in ways she hadn't since the early days of her diagnosis. She cried for the years of putting everyone else's needs first, for the public engagements she had pushed through despite feeling unwell, for the children's events she had missed, and for the fear that she might never fully recover the person she used to be. William's own breaking point came during one of his visits when Kate had a particularly bad reaction to a new treatment. Seeing her in the clinic's emergency room, pale and unconscious while doctors worked around her, he realized how close he had come to losing her. The royal duties that had seemed so important suddenly felt meaningless compared to the woman lying in that hospital bed. He made a decision that night that would have consequences far beyond their personal lives. The phone call to his father was one of the most difficult conversations William had ever had. He explained that he would not be returning to London for several weeks, that Kate's treatment was at a critical stage, and that his place was by her side regardless of what royal obligations might be waiting. The silence that followed his announcement spoke volumes about the unprecedented nature of his decision to put family before duty so publicly. Kate's recovery was not linear. Good days were followed by setbacks, breakthroughs were tempered by new complications, and hope became something she had to choose daily rather than something that came naturally. Dr. Zimmerman explained that this was normal for her type of condition, but understanding the process intellectually didn't make living through it any easier emotionally. The turning point came after her 5th week at the clinic. Kate woke one morning and realized she had slept through the night without pain for the first time in months. The improvement was subtle but significant, and over the following days her energy levels began to stabilize in ways they hadn't since before her diagnosis. Dr. Zimmerman was cautiously optimistic, but warned that recovery would be a long process, requiring continued careful management of her health. William was at the clinic when Kate took her first walk around the grounds without assistance in over 2 months. They didn't speak much during that slow circuit of the garden, but both of them felt something shift in the quality of hope they were carrying. It wasn't the desperate hope of earlier weeks, but something more solid, more sustainable. They were beginning to believe that there might indeed be a path forward, back to each other and back to the life they wanted to build together. The decision about when to return to London became the next challenge. Kate was improving but still fragile, and the prospect of resuming royal duties felt overwhelming. They would need to find a new way of balancing their public responsibilities with Kate's health needs, a challenge that would require changing, not just their own expectations but also those of the institution they served, and the public who watched their every move. The return to Kensington Palace felt surreal after months away. Kate stood in the familiar hallway, surrounded by the antique furniture and oil paintings that had once made her feel so small and out of place. Now they felt different, not intimidating, but somehow irrelevant to the person she had become through months of illness and recovery. She was stronger in some ways, more fragile in others, and definitely changed in ways that would take time to fully understand. The children's reunion with their mother was both joyful and careful. They had been prepared for Kate's gradual return to normal activities, but seeing her in person after so long was overwhelming for all of them. Their youngest clung to her with desperate intensity, afraid she might disappear again, while their older child studied her face with worried eyes, looking for signs of the illness that had taken her away from them. William watched these interactions with a mixture of relief and concern. Kate's physical health had improved significantly during her time in Switzerland, but the emotional adjustment to being home was proving more complex than either of them had anticipated. She seemed almost like a visitor in her own home, uncertain about routines that had once been second nature, hesitant about making plans that extended more than a few days into the future. The palace staff welcomed Kate back with genuine warmth, but she could sense their careful attention to her every word and movement. Everyone was watching for signs of fatigue or stress, ready to step in if she pushed herself too hard. Their concern was touching but also exhausting. Kate felt like she was living under a microscope. where every decision about her daily activities became a group consultation about her health and capabilities. Dr. Zimmerman had been clear about the importance of gradually reintegrating into her royal duties. Kate could attend select events and meetings, but only with careful scheduling that allowed for rest periods and flexibility if she wasn't feeling well. The palace communications team worked to craft a message about her phased return to public life, but Kate knew that every public appearance would be scrutinized for evidence of her condition. Her first official engagement after returning from Switzerland was a visit to a children's hospital, something close to her heart and relatively low pressure compared to formal state functions. Kate spent hours preparing, not just reviewing briefing notes but also managing her own anxiety about being in public again. Would she have enough energy to connect meaningfully with the patients? What if she felt unwell during the visit? How would she handle questions from the media about her health? The morning of the hospital visit, Kate stood in front of her bedroom mirror, applying makeup that would hide any signs of fatigue and choosing clothes that would photograph well, while being comfortable enough for a potentially long day. William watched her preparations with the careful attention he had developed during her illness, reading the subtle signs of her energy levels and emotional state. The visit went better than Kate had dared to hope. Surrounded by children facing their own health battles, she found a strength and purpose that had been missing during the darkest days of her own illness. Their courage and resilience reminded her why she had chosen to focus her royal work on children's causes, and for the first time in months, she felt truly connected to her role as a working member of the royal family. But the public attention that followed the visit was overwhelming. Newspaper headlines analyzed every photo, looking for signs of weight loss or fatigue. Social media buzzed with speculation about her appearance and behavior. Palace staff monitored the coverage carefully, but Kate herself tried to avoid reading the commentary about her health and appearance. She was learning that recovery meant protecting herself from external pressures that could undermine her progress. William's own adjustment to Kate's return was complicated by months of carrying royal responsibilities alone while managing his fear about her condition. He had become hyper-vigilant about her health, sometimes anticipating problems before they occurred, and struggling to find the balance between being supportive and being overprotective. Kate appreciated his concern but also needed space to rediscover her own strength and independence. Their evening routine slowly began to return to something resembling normal. Family dinners, help with homework, bedtime stories, all the ordinary. Activities that had felt impossible during Kate's illness gradually became manageable again. But both William and Kate remained aware of how quickly things could change, how precious these ordinary moments were, and how important it was not to take their recovery for granted. The palace physicians continued to monitor Kate's progress closely, adjusting medications and recommending modifications to her schedule based on how she responded to increased activity. Some days were better than others, and learning to accept this variability without panicking became an ongoing challenge for both Kate and William. They were developing a new relationship with uncertainty, one that acknowledged fragility while still allowing for hope and planning. Kate began working with a therapist recommended by Dr. Zimmerman, someone who specialized in helping people adjust to life after serious illness. These sessions helped her process not just the trauma of being sick, but also the complex emotions around returning to a very public life while still feeling vulnerable. She was learning to set boundaries in ways she never had before, to say no to requests that would compromise her health, even when disappointing people felt painful. The question of future pregnancies became an unspoken tension between Kate and William. They had always imagined having more children, but Kate's illness had raised questions about whether her body could handle the physical demands of pregnancy and childbirth. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but recommended waiting at least a year before considering pregnancy, and even then it would require careful monitoring and planning. Public interest in Kate's health continued to be intense, with royal watchers analyzing everything from her choice of clothing to the length of her public engagements for clues about her condition. Kate learned to navigate this attention by focusing on the work itself, rather than the commentary about her appearance or energy levels. She found that when she was genuinely engaged with the people and causes she was supporting, the external noise became less important. William's protective instincts sometimes clashed with Kate's desire to prove to herself and others that she was capable of fulfilling her royal duties. He worried about her taking on too much too quickly, while she worried about being seen as weak or unreliable. Finding the balance between his concern and her independence became an ongoing negotiation in their marriage, one that required constant communication and mutual respect for each other's perspectives. The Swiss clinic remained a safety net in their minds, a place they could return to if Kate's condition worsened or if the pressures of royal life became too much. Dr. Zimmerman stayed, in regular contact, monitoring her progress from afar and serving as a source of objective medical advice when palace physicians disagreed about her capabilities or limitations. As autumn approached, Kate found herself looking forward to the changing seasons in ways she hadn't during her illness. The prospect of cozy family evenings, holiday traditions, and the slower pace of winter felt manageable rather than overwhelming. She was learning to plan for the future while remaining present in each day, celebrating small victories while acknowledging that recovery was an ongoing process rather than a destination. 1 year after Kate's diagnosis, she stood in the same palace sitting room where they had first received the devastating news about her health. The morning light fell across the same antique furniture, but everything else had changed. Kate's hands were steady as she held a cup of tea, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been during those dark early days. William sat beside her, reading briefing notes for upcoming engagements, but his posture was relaxed rather than tense with worry. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Recovery had been a gradual process of learning to live differently, to honor her body's needs while still fulfilling her responsibilities as a senior member of the royal family. Kate had developed new rhythms that prioritized her health without completely sacrificing her sense of purpose and duty. The palace had adapted too, creating systems that supported her variable energy levels while maintaining the dignity and effectiveness of her royal role. Their children had grown during this difficult year, not just physically but emotionally. They had learned lessons about resilience, family loyalty, and the importance of health that would serve them well throughout their lives. Their youngest still worried sometimes when Kate was tired, but the fear that had once shadowed their family life had largely dissipated. Family game nights and holiday traditions had resumed, creating new memories that weren't overshadowed by illness. The public's relationship with Kate had evolved as well. While there was still intense interest in her health and appearances, there was also a new understanding of her as someone who had faced serious challenges with grace and determination. Her careful return to royal duties had been largely successful, with the media and public showing more respect for her limitations, while celebrating her continued commitment to her charitable work. Kate's first major speech after her recovery was at a mental health conference where she spoke openly about the emotional challenges of dealing with chronic illness. Her words resonated with millions of people who had faced similar struggles, and for the first time since becoming a royal, Kate felt like she was using her platform to share something genuinely personal and meaningful. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with letters pouring in from people thanking her for her honesty and courage. William had found his own path through the crisis, discovering strengths he didn't know he possessed and learning to balance his protective instincts with respect for Kate's autonomy. He had become more selective about his own royal commitments, choosing to focus on causes that truly mattered to him rather than simply fulfilling obligations. The experience had made him a more thoughtful leader and a more present father and husband. The marriage that had been tested by illness had emerged stronger in unexpected ways. William and Kate had learned to communicate about difficult topics with honesty, rather than trying to protect each other from painful truths. They had developed a deeper appreciation for ordinary moments, quiet mornings together, successful family outings, evenings when Kate felt well enough to cook dinner or help with school projects. Dr. Zimmerman continued to monitor Kate's progress, but their conversations had shifted from crisis management to long-term wellness strategies. Kate had learned to recognize her own warning signs and to make adjustments to her schedule before minor setbacks became major relapses. The Swiss clinic remained available if needed, but Kate felt confident that she had developed the tools and support systems necessary to manage her condition at home. The palace staff had learned valuable lessons about accommodating health challenges while maintaining royal standards and traditions. Kate's experience had led to policy changes that would benefit future generations of royals who might face similar health issues. The rigid expectations that had once seemed immutable had proven to be more flexible than anyone had imagined, adapting to support someone who was committed to service but needed to do it in a sustainable way. Kate's relationship with her own body had fundamentally changed through this experience. She had learned to listen to signals she had previously ignored, to rest when she needed rest rather than pushing through fatigue, and to celebrate her body's strength rather than focusing on its limitations. Physical activity remained important to her recovery, but she approached exercise differently now, choosing activities that brought joy rather than simply maintaining appearances. The uncertainty that had once felt so frightening had become more manageable as Kate developed confidence in her ability to handle whatever health challenges might arise in the future. She had learned that she was stronger than she had believed possible, but also that strength sometimes meant accepting help and acknowledging limitations rather than trying to do everything alone. William often reflected on how the crisis had changed his understanding of what it meant to be royal. The traditional emphasis on duty above all else had given way to a more nuanced appreciation of service that honored both public responsibilities and personal well-being. He believed that Kate's experience would ultimately make them both more effective in their roles, because they had learned to approach their work from a place of authenticity rather than simply obligation. The children's perspective on their mother's illness had evolved as well. They had initially seen it as something scary that took her away from them, but over time they came to understand it as part of what made her strong and compassionate. Kate's openness about her health challenges had taught them that it was okay to struggle, to need help, and to take time to heal when necessary. As they prepared for their next phase of royal life, William and Kate felt more prepared than ever to handle whatever challenges might come their way. They had survived the unthinkable, a health crisis that threatened not just Kate's well-being but their family's stability and their ability to serve the monarchy effectively. They had emerged changed but intact, scarred but stronger, more aware of their limitations but also more confident in their resilience. The trembling hands and silent tears that had marked the beginning of their ordeal had given way to steady confidence and open communication. Behind the palace doors, they had found not just survival, but a deeper understanding of themselves, each other, and what truly mattered in their extraordinary yet surprisingly ordinary life together. The future remained uncertain in many ways, but they faced it now with the knowledge that they could weather whatever storms might come. Together and apart, with courage they had discovered in their darkest moments and hope they had chosen to nurture every single day.